Jacobus tenBroek, lighting the torch of freedom and independence.
The Constitution of the United States declares that all persons born in the United States or naturalized are citizens. There is nothing in the Constitution or in the gloss upon it which I have ever been able to find which says that this section shall not apply to persons who are blind. Blind persons are citizens of the United States now, and are now possessed of the right to be citizens and share the privileges, immunities, and responsibilities of that status.
Jacobus tenBroek was born to Dutch immigrants Nicholas and Maria tenBroek on July 6, 1911, in a log cabin built on the wilderness frontier of Alberta, Canada. He was the second oldest of 6 children. Dr. Mark Maurer, President, National Federation of the Blind.
The first 7 years of Dr. tenBroek's life were typical of a child living on the Canadian prairie in the early 1900s. However, in the summer of 1918, Jacobus tenBroek lost his left eye as the result of an accident that occurred while he and a friend were playing with bows and arrows.
Dutch tenBroek, son of Jacobus tenBroek.
And then later on, he was actually playing baseball and got hit in the eye with a baseball, and they had to take out his other eye. So he was totally blind by 9.
But Jacobus tenBroek did not let blindness prevent him from doing all of the things that kids normally do.
Once he lost his eyesight, he has a marvelous story about learning to ride a bicycle, and he would follow my Aunt Lil, who had tied some empty aluminum cans, or I guess they were steel cans at that point, on a string on the back of her bicycle. And they were riding down a path one day, and the string broke, and the cans went down into a ditch, which of course Dad went down into the ditch right behind the cans. They moved to California so he could go to the School for the Blind, which is where he met Newell Perry. Dr. Newell Perry was the head of the California School for the Blind. At one point, Dr. Perry expelled Dad because Dad called Dr. Perry Doc. But I understand he actually got tossed out 3 or 4 times, but Dr. Perry always took him back, and in the end, they had a very fond relationship.
With the financial assistance of Dr. Perry, tenBroek entered the University of California, Berkeley in 1930. He received his undergraduate degree in history in 1934, graduating with highest honors. tenBroek earned the Doctor of the Science of Jurisprudence degree from Bolt Hall in 1940.
It was also while tenBroek was at Bolt Hall that he married Hazel Feldheim.
My mom was the linchpin in supporting Dad's career. Spent hours upon hours reading things, sometimes twice, because many times she would read something and then Dad would type it in Braille. She just was everything that Dad needed, from secretary to guide to support to cheerleader.
The originality of tenBroek's legal scholarship, as displayed in the Extrinsic Aids articles, earned him a Louis Brandeis Research Fellowship at Harvard Law School. 7 years later, tenBroek had completed the necessary work to receive the Doctor of Juridical Science from Harvard Law School.
He then returned to Berkeley in the fall of 1942 to become an instructor in the speech department. By 1953, tenBroek had been promoted to full professor, and he served as the chairman of the speech department from 1955 to 1961. In 1963, Jacobus tenBroek became a full professor in the Berkeley Political Science Department.
In 1940, Jacobus tenBroek founded the National Federation of the Blind, with 17 blind men and women representing 7 of the 48 states.
If you had at that time to pick out a group of people that nobody would expect to be able to get accomplished much of anything, it would have been the group of blind people. And Dr. tenBroek said, we're going to take this group that nobody else cares about, or at least that nobody believes in, and we're going to make this group a group that will have the kind of ability to change things that nobody has ever known. And it's worked.
During the period 1937 through 1966, tenBroek authored over 30 scholarly articles on constitutional law, civil rights issues, and welfare law that were published in law reviews and professional journals. Michael Stein, William and Mary School of Law.
The tenBroek and Tussman Equal Protection of the Law article remains to this day one of the most cited articles in constitutional law. Its analysis of over-inclusion, under-inclusion, and constitutional classification is still the basic format for thinking about how states can properly, or when they improperly, create laws that include or exclude people.
Michael Tigar, Washington College of Law.
The tenBroek-Tussman article, The Equal Protection of the Laws, gave us tools to see how the state can impermissibly, if we read the 14th Amendment correctly, exclude people from the benefits that belong to everybody who lives in society, who lives in the world, and thus is an important step in the development of women's rights, gay rights, all the other categories that we're now accustomed to apply in this area, that at the time they wrote that article in the 1940s had just begun to be talked about.
One could argue that the jurisprudence of the 14th Amendment, the way that lawyers think about the 14th Amendment and the rights that are included in it, changed dramatically from a pre-tenBroek world to a post-tenBroek world.
Leslie Francis, University of Utah.
The right to live in the world is probably the most influential article in encouraging people to think about issues of disability as issues of civil rights, the rights of people to be able to go around in the world and lead ordinary lives just as other people do, without confronting barriers.
One could argue that the right to be in the world, the torts article, although it is focused on torts, really goes a long way towards precursoring or laying the groundwork for the social model of disability. The idea that persons with disabilities are not by themselves inherently limited in the way they get around and interact with the world, but rather created structures, whether physical environment, law, modes of administration, etc., create those impairments.
And what tenBroek's piece was absolutely seminal in was getting people to think about how it is important to understand disability as how people interact with the world. And people have a right to interact with the world, to live in the world. And if the way we think about that is if someone has a physical or an intellectual impairment, it's their problem and they ought to stay home and stay out of the way, that's absolutely wrong.
From the right to live in the world, Dr. tenBroek developed the Model White Cane Law, which has become known as the Civil Rights Bill for the blind, the disabled, and the otherwise physically handicapped.
That law said that it is the policy of the state that the blind and otherwise handicapped shall be a part of the activities within the state. That was the formative piece of writing that eventually was incorporated in the 1973 Rehabilitation Act as the civil rights provisions of that act. The thoughts behind the civil rights provisions of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 created the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And also those thoughts were incorporated in other amendments to the Rehabilitation Act, which became effective in 1998, which said that when the government buys technology, it has to be accessible to and usable by disabled people. In other words, Dr. tenBroek's article created the civil rights movement for disabled people.
Other important scholarly articles written by tenBroek include Sheltered Workshops for the Physically Disabled, Journal of Urban Law, 1966, and California's Dual System of Family Law, Its Origin, Development, and Present Status, Stanford Law Review, 1964-1965. Published in 1951, the book Anti-Slavery, Origins of the 14th Amendment was reprinted in 1965 under the title Equal Under the Law. A 1953 letter from Thurgood Marshall to Dr. tenBroek notes how the NAACP lawyers had taken full advantage of this book in their preparation of argument of the school segregation cases before the United States Supreme Court.
Dr. tenBroek more or less resurrected the idea of equal protection, 14th Amendment law. Thurgood Marshall, Justice Marshall, found those writings to be of great use in arguing Brown the second time around.
Ted Shaw, NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
In many ways, in a quiet way, but in a significant way, he played an important role in Brown versus Board of Education. And Brown, of course, broke the back of American apartheid. It helped to set the stage for the modern civil rights movement. So there are many unsung heroes. He's one of them.
Jacobus tenBroek died from cancer on March 27, 1968, at the age of 56. Long after his untimely death, however, his legacy continues.
Everybody, and I mean everybody, should examine Dr. tenBroek's work and understand the profound impact that it has had on all of us. The historical and functional analysis, those two sides of his equal protection analysis, have helped bring people into the world, out into the world, who were excluded from it.
tenBroek's influence is not cabined into issues of disability. It's a general civil rights perspective, and what's been influential in disability has been seeing disability as of a piece with other civil rights issues rather than as an issue of special privilege.
Dr. tenBroek's vision for America was one in which race, gender, physical limitations or handicap or conditions, that those things would not define either an individual's worth or what that individual's opportunities would be. I don't doubt that he understood that individuals all have the responsibility, the charge to define their lives themselves. But it was clear that he did not want their lives to be defined by what they are as opposed to who they are.
The right to live in the world, it's a wonderful phrase. I mean, shouldn't we all have the right to live in the world? To do what people do that makes life satisfying. And the phrase, the right to live in the world, it's just a marvelous way to capture what everyone ought to have.
I would like everybody who sees this video, who listens to these words, to think about the day that they're having right now. And they get up in the morning, and maybe they use an elevator, and there are Braille signs for the floors. There's a ding or a mechanized voice that tells you what floor you're on. They'll go out into the street, and they'll see that the curbs are cut down so that wheelchairs can use them. If they go to an ATM, they'll see signs on there in Braille or a place you can plug in earphones. 50 years ago, almost none of this existed. And as my wife says, you know, suddenly in New York City, she one day looked around and said, God, there's an awful lot of disabled people out here. Where did they come from? Well, where did they come from? Because they had achieved the right to live in the world. And all we have to do is look around and then bit by bit imagine that these things weren't there to see the social transformation that has taken place. That is Dr. tenBroek's legacy. He was the earliest, most insistent, and clearest voice about those questions.
The National Federation of the Blind has established the Jacobus tenBroek Library, a research and resource center on blindness at the Jernigan Institute, to provide a permanent space for Dr. tenBroek's published and unpublished writings and correspondence. It is our intention to continue advancing the legal torch of freedom and independence that Dr. tenBroek so brilliantly lit.
Our access to the mainstreams of community life, the aspirations and achievements of each of us, are to be limited only by the skills, energy, talents, and abilities we individually bring to the opportunities equally open to all Americans.